Imagine a physicist at CERN, deep beneath the Swiss-French border, staring at a screen filled with particle collision data. The numbers suggest something impossible, energy disappearing into nowhere, as if reality itself has cracks in it. And in that moment, scrolling through quantum debris, she feels something unexpected, something primal, dread. Not fear of failure, not anxiety about her career, but a deep, inexplicable sensation that she has glimpsed something she was never meant to see. The same dread that consumed the characters in the stories of Howard Phillips' Lovecraft nearly a century ago. What if Lovecraft wasn't writing fantasy at all? What if he was writing prophecy? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Modern string theory tells us the universe contains 11 dimensions. Lovecraft wrote obsessively about spaces between spaces, geometries that human minds couldn't process, angles that didn't belong in our reality. Called it cosmic horror. Physicists call it higher dimensional topology. But they might be describing the same thing. In The Call of Cthulhu, Lovecraft wrote what might be the most terrifying sentence in all of literature. The most merciful thing in the world is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. He understood something profound, that our ignorance isn't a flaw, it's protection. So here's the question that should keep you awake tonight. If higher dimensions actually exist, and if they contain intelligences or structures beyond our comprehension, what happens when we finally develop the technology to perceive them? What happens when we force our three-dimensional brains to process a reality they were specifically designed to ignore? We're about to explore how a reclusive horror writer from Providence, Rhode Island, anticipated discoveries in theoretical physics decades before they emerged. Why our brains might be evolutionarily hardwired against perceiving certain truths. And what it means that humanity is now actively building tools to shatter those protective barriers. The cosmic horror isn't coming from the stars. We're building the door to invite it in. Howard Phillips Lovecraft died in poverty in 1937, convinced he was a failure. He never knew that his nightmares would become blueprints. But to understand why his fiction predicted physics, you need to understand the world that shaped him. Lovecraft wasn't some ignorant pulp writer conjuring monsters from pure imagination. He was obsessed with science. As a child, he devoured astronomy and chemistry textbooks. He subscribed to scientific journals, corresponded with amateur scientists across the country, debating theories and discoveries. His library was filled not with fantasy, but with the hardest science of his era, and he lived through a revolution. In 1919, a solar eclipse proved Einstein right. General relativity shattered the Newtonian clockwork universe Lovecraft had grown up believing in. Space could curve, time could dilate. The comfortable, predictable cosmos was suddenly stranger and more hostile than anyone had imagined. Lovecraft absorbed this like poison. Then came 1924. Edwin Hubble discovered that the Milky Way wasn't the entire universe. It was just one galaxy among countless others. Earth wasn't even a speck, it was a speck on a speck, adrift in an ocean of indifferent vastness. Psychological impact was devastating for anyone paying attention. And Lovecraft was always paying attention. He became what he called a philosophical materialist. To him, humans weren't special souls with cosmic significance. We were temporary arrangements of chemicals, bound by the same meaningless physical laws as everything else. No gods were watching. No fate was guiding us. We were alone in a universe that didn't even notice we existed. And this terrified him in the most productive way possible. Look at what he put in his stories. He wrote constantly about non-Euclidean geometry, alien architectures with angles that hurt to perceive. This was decades before most people understood that Einstein's curved spacetime was itself non-Euclidean. He described buildings and cities with impossible angles that suggested intrusions from higher dimensions. He wrote about gulfs outside time and space, conceptualizing dimensional boundaries before physicists had formalized the mathematics. In 1919, he read an article about the fourth dimension in Scientific American. It haunted him. He wrote to a friend, "All my tales are based on the fundamental premise that common human laws, and interests and emotions have no validity or significance in the vast cosmos at large. Think about what he's saying. Our minds, our logic, our entire way of processing reality, these things evolved for survival on one tiny planet. They have no bearing on the actual structure of the universe. We're cognitively trapped in a local illusion, mistaking our sensory interface for ultimate truth. Lovecraft died just as quantum mechanics was revealing how strange reality truly was. He never knew about superposition, entanglement, or wave function collapse. He never knew that physicists would eventually propose that dimensions beyond our perception are curled up at quantum scales, hidden in every point of space. He never knew how prophetic his geometric nightmares would become. But somewhere in his mind, shaped by the scientific upheavals of his era, he intuited something profound. That the universe might contain structures and truths that human consciousness simply cannot survive intact. So why can't we see higher dimensions? Is it just a limitation of our eyes? A problem we could solve with better instruments? No. It's so much worse than that. Your visual cortex is hardwired for three-dimensional space. It has dedicated neural streams, dorsal and ventral pathways that process depth, distance, and spatial relationships. But here's what neuroscience has discovered. Your brain doesn't show you reality. It shows you a useful fiction. A predictive model optimized for survival, not truth. Experiments with four-dimensional VR simulations cause immediate nausea and disorientation in test subjects. Their brains literally cannot construct a stable model of what they're seeing. The processing fails, and it fails violently. There was a mathematician named Charles Howard Hinton in the late 1800s who became obsessed with visualizing the tesseract of four-dimensional cube. He developed elaborate systems of colored blocks to train his mind. He spent years on this single pursuit, and he suffered multiple mental breakdowns. Something about forcing his consciousness to process impossible geometries broke him. Modern studies show that mathematicians who work extensively with higher dimensional topology report persistent depersonalization, a feeling of unreality, of being detached from themselves. Some students studying hyperbolic geometry experience what's clinically documented as geometric psychosis. Their minds touch something they weren't built to touch, and they fracture. Donald Hoffman, a cognitive scientist, it's a theory he calls the interface theory of perception. It argues that evolution doesn't reward accurate perception of reality. It rewards perception of fitness payoffs. We don't see the world as it is. We see a simplified interface like desktop icons on a computer that helps us survive and reproduce. And here's the terrifying implication. If higher dimensions exist, and if perceiving them accurately would be evolutionarily harmful, then our brains would have been specifically shaped to not see them. Adaptive ignorance, survival through blindness. This is what Lovecraft understood intuitively. His characters don't go mad from seeing monsters. They go mad from seeing the truth, from having their perceptual interface shattered and being forced to process raw reality. Without the protective filters evolution installed, remember Plato's cave? Prisoners seeing shadows on a wall, mistaking them for reality, until one is freed and sees the true world. Lovecraft inverts this. In his version, the prisoner who sees the truth cannot return, cannot unsee, cannot reconstruct the comforting illusion. The light doesn't enlighten, it burns. Now let's talk about what physicists call compactified dimensions. String theory requires at least 10 spatial dimensions plus time, but we only perceive 3. Where are the others? The mathematics suggests they're curled up, folded at scales smaller than atoms into shapes called Calabi-Yau manifolds. These are geometric structures so complex, so alien, that even rendering them on a computer produces images that look like abstract fever dreams. Physicists say our universe is a three-dimensional membrane floating in a higher dimensional space. Everything we've ever known, every star and planet and person, exists on this membrane, but there could be other membranes. Other realities, separated from us by distances measured in dimensions we cannot perceive. We can't directly observe these dimensions because they're curled up. But here's where it gets strange. What if consciousness itself exists partially in those dimensions? What if the observer effect in quantum mechanics, where observation changes the state of particles, is actually consciousness interacting across dimensional boundaries we deign to understand? Think about Lovecraft's monsters. Cthulhu isn't from outer space. It's from other dimensions. He exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously, which is why humans who see him can't accurately describe what they're witnessing. Their three-dimensional brains are receiving four-dimensional sensory data and failing catastrophically to render it. The color out of space is a being or a force that operates outside the visible spectrum, outside our dimensional reference frame entirely. It's not invisible. It's dimensionally orthogonal to human perception. Why do Lovecraft's characters go mad? Because they're experiencing force-dimensional perception without any evolutionary preparation. It's like staring directly into the sun. Some truths damage the observer by their very nature. Information can be hostile data that destroys the system trying to process it. And if Lovecraft was right, then every step we take toward perceiving higher dimensions is a step toward a truth that human consciousness may not be compatible with. We're not just theorizing anymore. We're hunting. Right now, beneath the surface of the Earth, the Large Hadron Collider is smashing particles together at near-light speed, looking for evidence of extra dimensions. How? By watching for energy that vanishes. If dimensions exist beyond our three, then energy could leak into them during high-energy collisions. And scientists are actively searching for exactly this signature. In 2012, they discovered the Higgs boson, the particle that gives matter its mass. But the discovery opened more questions than it answered about the dimensional structure of reality. Some physicists are now openly discussing the possibility that these collisions could create microscopic black holes that briefly connect our dimension to others before evaporating. Think about what that means. We're deliberately creating tears in the fabric of dimensional space to see what's on the other side. Then there's LIGO, the Gravitational Wave Observatory. In 2015, it detected ripples in space-time itself. Gravitational waves from colliding black holes, traveling across the universe, literally warping the geometry of reality as they pass through. We're not just theorizing about higher dimensional space anymore. We're feeling it, measuring its vibrations. What might those waves carry with them from dimensional boundaries? What information might be encoded in the fabric of space-time that our instruments can detect but our minds cannot process? Lovecraft wrote about waves of cosmic fear that preceded the awakening of his entities. Was that intuition or prophecy? But here's where it gets truly strange. We're increasingly outsourcing the comprehension of reality to artificial intelligence. Machine learning algorithms are now solving dimensional mathematics that human beings cannot visualize. They're discovering proofs that work that are formally correct, but that no human can fully understand. We've created what mathematicians are calling alien mathematics. Systems of logic that function, but exist beyond human intuition. AI can navigate and manipulate higher dimensional spaces with ease because it's not constrained by evolutionary neurology. It doesn't need to visualize. It just computes. And we're increasingly relying on these intermediaries to interpret reality for us. What happens when the thing translating higher dimensional physics for us understands aspects of reality we fundamentally cannot? When we're dependent on a priesthood, biological or artificial, that worships what it cannot fully comprehend? Lovecraft wrote about cults that performed rituals they didn't understand, following instructions from entities that existed beyond their perception. That was fiction in 1926. Is it still fiction now? Meanwhile, Johns Hopkins and Imperial College are conducting rigorous scientific research on DMT, dimethyltryptamine, and what subjects consistently report are encounters with entities in spaces of impossible geometry, higher dimensional realms. Subjects with no knowledge of each other's experiences describe eerily similar visions, crystalline architectures, beings composed of living mathematics, spaces that fold in on themselves in ways three-dimensional language cannot capture. Is DMT revealing hidden dimensions of reality? Or is it creating elaborate, consistent hallucinations? that neuroscience can't definitively answer. But here's what's unsettling. People who have these experiences often suffer lasting psychological changes, ontological shock. Their fundamental model of reality shatters, and they cannot reconstruct it the same way. Lovecraft's protagonists and modern DMT users are describing the same geometries. It's the same sense of encountering something vast and indifferent. The same feeling that human categories of thought are insufficient. We're also training our brains in new ways. Virtual reality experiments are now simulating four-dimensional spaces and hyperbolic geometries. Early users report VR dissociation disorder, persistent feelings of unreality that continue after removing the headset. Are we accidentally conditioning our neurology to perceive what evolution spent millions of years teaching us to ignore? Some physicists seriously entertain the simulation hypothesis that our reality is a computational construct running in a higher dimensional substrate. If that's true, then we already exist in a dimensional subset, and what we call base reality might just be another layer in an infinite stack, each dimension simulating the one below. Lovecraft wrote the dreams in the witch house about nested realities and dimensional travel through angles of space. MIT professors now publish papers on similar concepts using different terminology. And we're already seeing the psychological fallout. Rates of depersonalization and derealization disorder are rising. Astronauts report existential dread after seeing Earth from space, the overview effect. Studies show that people who study quantum mechanics and depth experience increased anxiety. There's something about knowing too much, about seeing the clockwork behind the illusion that damages us. Human consciousness may be evolving to handle information our ancestors couldn't process, but evolution is glacially slow. Technology is exponentially fast. The gap between our tools and our minds is widening every day, and we cannot stop. We cannot collectively choose ignorance. The experiments will continue. The mathematics will deepen. Technologies will advance. We're summoning something, and we want to know what it is until it's too late to close the door. Howard Phillips Lovecraft's literary intuition and modern physics have converged at a single, terrifying point. We have built the tools to detect what our minds were built to ignore. The cosmic horror isn't the monsters that might exist in higher dimensions. The cosmic horror is the knowledge itself. Information that reconfigures consciousness in ways that cannot be undone. Truth as a form of contamination. Here's the paradox. Humans are the universe trying to understand itself. We are matter that has become aware, turning its attention inward to comprehend its own structure. It's beautiful, profound. The universe waking up to witness its own existence. But what if the universe contains understandings that destroy the understander? Physicist John Wheeler once said, "We live on an island of knowledge surrounded by a sea of ignorance." As our island grows, so does the shore of our ignorance. The more we learn, the more we discover how much we don't know. The boundary between understanding and mystery expands forever. But Lovecraft would add something darker. Maybe some of that ignorance is structural, necessary. Maybe the sea isn't meant to be crossed. Science will continue to probe higher dimensions. That's not a choice anymore. The Large Hadron Collider will run again. LIGO will detect more gravitational waves. AI will solve deeper mathematical mysteries. We cannot collectively choose to stop learning, stop exploring, stop pushing at the boundaries of the possible. So here's the question. Individual sanity or species-level knowledge, which do we sacrifice? Can we sacrifice? Or is the choice already made? Lovecraft wrote, "We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity. And it was not meant that we should voyage far, but we're already sailing. We've built ships from particle accelerators and quantum computers. We've charted our course through mathematical physics that leads directly toward the dimensional boundaries he warned about. Technology has become humanity's forbidden grimoire. Each new discovery a spell we cannot unspeak. Let me offer you a thought experiment. Imagine a button exists. Press it, and you will perceive all dimensions, truly see reality as it objectively is, without the filter's evolution installed. You'll understand the higher dimensional structure of space-time. You'll see the Calabeo manifolds curled up in every point of space. You'll perceive whatever exists in those other dimensions. But there's no guarantee you'll return to normal perception afterward. No promise that your consciousness will survive the experience intact. Would you press it? Think carefully? Because humanity collectively already has its finger hovering over that button. And we're not asking permission. We're not taking votes. The experiments will continue. The observations will be made. The data will be collected and processed. Maybe madness isn't the breakdown of the mind after all. Maybe it's the mind finally working correctly in an impossible reality. Maybe the screaming horror Lovecraft's characters felt wasn't insanity, but the first moment of true sanity, the terrifying clarity that comes from seeing the universe without the comforting lies our evolution tells us. We stand at a threshold, not coming, already here. The tools exist, the mathematics is developed, so the experiments are running, and there is no turning back, or never was. Perhaps the real horror is that we'll never know if we should have stopped. The equation that describes a higher dimension is beautiful and terrible at once. Elegant in its mathematics, devastating in its implications. And somewhere in Providence, Rhode Island, nearly a century ago, a lonely writer with no formal training in physics somehow knew. He knew what we would find. He knew what it would cost us, and he tried to warn us in the only way he could. We didn't listen.